Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Fallen London. Today we're going to be carrying on with the exceptional story, Inheritance. And it looks like we're going to be prying up stones. The ardent bookkeeper believes his beloved, the Sage Archivist, is in danger, and tasked you with determining what from. To this end, you investigated both her place of work and his. Let's collate our evidence. You should do this before making any decisions. Alongside her work with First City cuneiform tablets, the Sage Archivist conducts unofficial research into the archival applications of lacquer. A month ago, she received a letter written in sticky ink offering her a reward in exchange for revealing the location of something beneath London. The ink matched a letter sent to the ardent bookkeeper a year ago by his employer, Mr. Apples, who asked the bookkeeper to get the measure of the archivist. This appears to be how the couple met. What is still unclear whether the archivist is indeed under threat. It seems likely that Mr. Apples was a factor in her decision to end her relationship with the bookkeeper. Since you told the ardent bookkeeper you'd help him investigate, he'll be expecting to hear from you. Well, let's go speak to him, I suppose. You've taken the investigation as far as you can by yourself. It is time to bring your information to one of the parties concerned. Ooh, so I can either talk to the Sage Archivist, the ardent bookkeeper, or Mr. Apples. I am very much drawn towards choosing Mr. Apples. I feel like that is the more interesting choice here. Oh no. Let's go speak to Mr. Apples. Back in the side streets, you overheard one of the ardent bookkeeper's colleagues say that Mr. Apples would be visiting one of its warehouses in Wolfstack Docks to inspect its latest shipment. Now you make your way to the warehouse. Within, a cloaked figure is shambling between barrels, clawing open their lids and taking deep sniffs. As you approach, the figure turns to face you. Though you cannot see beneath its hood, there is something appraising in its attention, as if it's determining your ripeness. Mr. Apples wraps a claw around your wrist and leads you through the barrels to an office overlooking the docks. It closes the door behind you and draws you close. Beneath the folds of its claret-coloured robe, you catch a glint of its sparkling eyes, like ripe berries. "Only my employers know of this place," it says, its voice sticky. It scuttles its claws further up your arm and buries its face in your sleeve. You catch a glimpse of frilled nose. "You've been reading my correspondence," it says. "I can smell the ink." Okay, well, let's ask him the most obvious question. What does he want with the archivist? It told her it wished to preserve life. Mr. Apples tightens its grip on your arm when you mention the archivist. "I have an interest in the preservation of life," it says. "It is thanks to my expertise in this field that the Neath has any vegetables at all. Meanwhile, your archivist friend has an interest in the preservation of ideas. But what she fails to understand is that an idea is only truly alive in a mind when it is," it licks its teeth, "part meat." It lets you go. "She has something that could help me preserve life, and by extension, ideas. She thinks she is protecting it. She is merely letting it decay." "You know something," says Mr. Apples. "It can help me help the Neath. Tell me, and I'll reward you." So we have two options. We can tell Mr. Apples about the Archivist's lacquerous experiments, but keep the map secret. Your reward will be smaller. Apples will take longer to track down its quarry. Or we can tell Mr. Apples everything and draw it a copy of the map. Let's hold back the map. Mr. Apple's breathing grows heavier as you explain the Archivist's experiments. When you recount the surface memories you experienced in the lacquer lab, it practically vibrates with excitement. You came to me with what you know, to further the wisdom of the Neath. I will not forget it. It fumbles inside its cloak, and then deposits a clawful of sticky coins in your hand. 50 pennies, is that it? You've told Mr. Apples much of what you know, but kept the location secret. Mr. Apples scrapes a claw over a barrel. These beetroots are pickled, it hisses, like knowledge preserved in books. The ink ruins the flavour. Well, let's return home. You can still follow the Archivist to her hiding place, but first, rest. You leave the bustle of Wolfstag Docks and return to the comparative calm of your lodgings to ready yourself for the expedition. Somewhere across the city, the Sage Archivist is making similar preparations. The story continues at Violent Cartography, available anywhere in London. Let's go find out. Violet lingers in the mind and reveals uncomfortable connections. For example, the similarities between a city that fell into the cavern thousands of years ago before being crushed by another, and London. You push that thought to the back of your mind and concentrate on your memory of the violent symbols. The iridescent squiggles swim up through your subconscious. The route to the secret passage is clear. All that remains is to follow it. Well, let's make our way to the secret passage. It is the only way to find out what the Sage Archivist is hiding. The symbols lead you to an unassuming terrace. You slip down an alley and, when no one is looking, clamber over the fence of the house that corresponds with the violent symbol. The back door is loose. You shoulder your way inside and come face to face with the Sage Archivist and the Ardent Bookkeeper, who gives you a wounded look. You're coming with us, says the Archivist, and crouches to roll up the large rug that covers the centre of the room. I don't have time, she pants, to determine whether you're here to stop me, help me, or spy on me. All I know is that it's too risky to leave you. I can't trust a word you say, she coughs through the dust, so I won't ask you to explain why you went to Apples. The bookkeeper sidles over to you while she works. Maybe you thought you were doing the right thing, he says. But I lost my job. When I found out, I went straight to the university to warn her, and she took me straight here. Didn't want to leave me on my own in case anything happened to me. He smiles, a little desperate himself. Right, says the Archivist. He stands up and waves the dust out of her face. Before her is a large wooden trap door. The Sage Archivist starts to haul open the trap door, and the Ardent Bookkeeper rushes to help her. I've done this myself countless times, she says, but she cannot hide a smile. Once it is open, she lights a lantern and climbs down through the hole. Come on, she calls, her voice echoing from what sounds like a stone corridor. The Ardent Bookkeeper gives you an apprehensive look and slithers down after her. Let's follow them through the trapdoor. It is time. You lower yourself onto a stone staircase. Below, the light from the Sage Archivist's lantern ripples off the walls. The staircase led to the house's cellar, she says, until the cellar collapsed right over some 4th City ruins. My mother bought the house. Your ears pop as you slide down the curved dome of the vast stupa into a temple. Deep inside the brightly painted ruins is a collapsed floor that empties you onto the remains of a stepped pyramid. "Third city," mutters the archivist. The weight of the falling fourth city caused a crack in the pyramid, so wide that you are able to slip through it and onto the vast basalt head of a lion. "I don't think Apples would enjoy coming through here," remarks the ardent bookkeeper in an attempt at levity. "Maybe," replies the archivist gently, "but I think it wants what's down here enough to try." The three of you clamber down to the sand at the lion's feet. Before you is a tomb. "That leads to what's left of the first city," says the archivist. "But we've still got a long way to go." Okay. You brought information to Apples, but didn't tell her the location of the secret passage. It will track the place down eventually, but you still have a head start. The Sage Archivist does not trust you, and this will make your journey more difficult. Oh no. I guess that is my own fault. The three of you scurry beneath the torn rock of the second city like mice beneath the floorboards of a rotten house. The Sage Archivist and the ardent bookkeeper are several steps behind you, deep in conversation. A clawed thing skitters over the rocks. Though successes here will raise towards a hidden place and make progress towards your destination. If the Sage Archivist's trust in you is low, branches utilizing your main statistics will still provide progress. Yeah, she doesn't want to tell me anything. Let's eavesdrop. They may say something revelatory. "You won't feel that way when we get there," says the Sage Archivist. "It'll disgust you. You won't ever want to see me again." "I thought you wanted me to not see you anymore," replies the bookkeeper. He sighs. "I did. I mean, it would be better. It's just, I think I wanted you to remember me a certain way." "I never thought about the way you saw me," he replies. "I just wanted to be with you." Okay, expedition is progressing. Pools of melted lacquer. You can clear the rocks. This passage could be a shortcut. Explore the temple. What does it venerate? Well, we can observe Mr. Apples. Let's explore the temple. Inside the temple ruins, the ground crunches beneath your feet like gravel. You stoop to pick up some pieces. Each is carved from different rock. One, you realize, is a coin, so covered in dust that it resembled stone. 4 cities have been crushed into the floor of this cavern, says the Sage Archivist. Look hard enough and you'll find pieces of them all crumbled together like crumbs in a biscuit tin. That reminds me, says the ardent bookkeeper, reaching into his pocket. I bought some fungal crackers. Didn't know how long we'd be down here. I mean, that's pretty smart. We got some relics there. First, second, third and fourth. I thought first city coins were fake. Maybe not. Let's see. We can observe Mr. Apples. It is just close enough to see. Mr. Apples goes suddenly rigid. Carefully, it scratches at the rock with its feet. Then it stoops and puts its face to the ground. Its hood vibrating silently as it sniffs. It must have picked up some kind of trail, or follows the scent to a stone gully. Lacquer once coursed through those channels, whispers the Sage Archivist. After it drowned the first city, it flowed away to some place beneath, and took the remnants of the city's people with it. There must still be traces of them. Pickled, whispers the bookkeeper. The archivist smiles. Oh, is Mr. Apples looking for the bodies of the previous residents of the cities? The rock ceiling above you is so low that you have to stoop. The Sage Archivist walks a few steps ahead, while the ardent bookkeeper brings up the rear. We're not allowed to play music at work, he says quietly. Can't even hum. I think the sound does something to Mr. Apples. A clawed thing skitters over the rocks. Let's talk to the ardent bookkeeper. What is it like for him, being down here at last? In my first year at the Vegetable Import Office, says the ardent bookkeeper, we accomplished a bureaucracy coup, a reduction in the tax on pickled cucumber imports. We all went to Valegarden to celebrate. We ended up in a honey den. I didn't like it. Parabola scared me even more than Valegarden. I was glad when it was all over. He pulls his coat tightly around him. This is worse, not just because my body is here too. He gazes ahead at the Sage Archivist, but this place made her who she is. So I'm glad to have seen it. I think we have to eavesdrop again. I mean, we could try and sing. Your voices will echo off the cave walls. Let's try it. 12%. Oh no, we failed. The ardent bookkeeper's voice is strong and clear, entirely different from his soft speech. But the Sage Archivist's voice wavers, her flat notes discordant. Whatever sound the three of you are making, it can scarcely be described as music. I'm sorry, says the Archivist. I'm nervous. Okay, let's eavesdrop. Uh-oh. I have a funny feeling he's rather close. You inhale the scent of overripe fruit, and your eyes water. Read that one before? Oh, I think we're here. White mycelial threads are draped over the rocks, like a lace tablecloth. Before you stands a ruined temple, its roof crushed by the second city. The Sage Archivist walks a few steps ahead, while the ardent bookkeeper brings up the rear. You inhale the scent of overripe fruit and your eyes water. The Sage Archivist stops alongside a large bas-relief depicting a troupe of winged women. The entrance is behind this wall, he whispers. Are we ready? I think we are ready. Your destination lies beyond. Ensure you have fully explored the tunnels and put a little between yourself and Mr. Apples if you do not wish to hinder the creature. It cannot hurt to be a few steps ahead. I think we have enough. I'm sure it's fine. The Sage Archivist runs her hand along the stone wing until she finds a missing feather. She slips her fingers into the hole that is a crunch, and the bas-relief springs loose to reveal a staircase. A fifth city modification, he whispers. You and the ardent bookkeeper follow her down the staircase into a long chamber. At the far end, a robed woman sleeps on a narrow bed, her skin pale and waxy. The Sage Archivist gently squeezes her shoulder. I'm a little early, she says. The woman opens a pair of glittering eyes and reaches out to touch the Archivist's face, leaving streaks of lacquer upon her cheek. This is my ancestor, says the Archivist, helping the woman to sit upright. No easy feat, given the disconcerting malleability of her limbs. I've been looking after her a long time. She's an astronomer from the first city. First city, that's a few thousand years ago. Good lord. The lacquerous astronomer opens her pale mouth, revealing crystalline teeth. She says something you do not understand. If the language is one you know, her dialect is so unfamiliar as to render the words unintelligible. The fifth city, says the Sage Archivist gently. Remember? The astronomer's glittering gaze meanders across the room and lands upon the ardent bookkeeper. Is he the one you told me about? She says in a cracked voice. The Archivist goes red. Yes, he whispers, but this isn't the time. She rolls up her sleeves and looks at you and the bookkeeper. Could you both wait outside? Don't be silly, says the astronomer. They can stay. She begins to unlace her robe. Apparently we can watch. The lacquerous astronomer does not mind. The Sage Archivist helps the lacquerous astronomer out of her robe. Beneath it, Her pale body is featureless, but for a huge crystalline scar where her heart should be. Her chest is hollow, like a geode, but the walls of the cavity ripple as she breathes, scattering shards of light about the room. The archivist reaches beneath the bed for a knife and runs the sparkling blade across her own palm. The ardent bookkeeper winces as the blood spills from the wound. The archivist reaches inside the astronomer's crystal scar, which closes around her hand like a mouth. Gradually, the astronomer's waxy skin flushes with colour until it is the same light brown as the archivist's. The lacquerous astronomer's chest disgorges the Sage Archivist's hand, and the archivist slips the sparkling blade back into her boot before helping the astronomer back into her robe. "What is," stammers the ardent bookkeeper. "I mean, how? Why?" "I can show them," says the astronomer. "No," says the archivist. I forget how customs change," says the astronomer. "In the third..." "It isn't that," says the archivist. "You're in danger, and we have to leave." "My body isn't ready to walk. It takes a while. You know that, my dear." "Fine," says the archivist. "You can show them." He turns to you and the bookkeeper. "Or I can just explain, if you'd rather." Let's ask the lacquerous astronomer to show you everything. It may give you a fuller understanding." The lacquerous astronomer beckons you over. She cups her hand and closes her eyes, deep in concentration. Gradually, the flesh of her palms begins to melt until there is a tiny pool of lacquer in her hands. "I'd like to see too," says the ardent bookkeeper, stepping up to your side. "You don't have to," says the Sage Archivist, putting a hand on his arm. "I want to see what you've seen." He lowers his head to the astronomer's hands, breathes in, and collapses. The archivist rushes to his side. The lacquerous astronomer holds her hands out to you. You are lying on your back in the desert, the last light of the sun still blue on the western horizon. Though the air is cold, the sand is still warm. The distant stars vibrate, as if they were waiting for you before they began their show. So we have three options. Before the fall, the sky is so clear. A punishment, someone must bear the weight of the city. Or the descendants, they were unplanned. Let's go with before the fall. Astral clouds are billowing over the desert. The heavens are churning. You hurry back to the city and warn people that a calamity is coming. Many leave. The king summons you, thinking he wants your help to evacuate. You go willingly. You are wrong. He has sold the city, and its people were part of the price. You have put the deal in jeopardy. So dark is your prison that at first you do not realize you are underground. One night, the king visits you. He exchanged the city for his lover's life, but something went wrong. Perhaps if there had been no exodus, his lover would not be as he is. You see, this just proves that all of the deals that were done, the people who make the deals never get what they want. I'm trying to think what the first city is. Is this the one with Gilgamesh? Let's go with a punishment. Someone must bear the weight of the city. The king comes to your cell every day to lament his lover's worsening condition. Had it not been for the fall of your city, you would not believe the nature of the lover's malady. Their relationship will not survive it. The king gives you a cloaked figure and asks it to make you feel his grief. The creature promises to prolong your torment. it knows about such things. The creature grinds a mountain into you and drowns you in memory snow until you are filled with the sadness of the whole city. You never see the king again. This reminds me of the King of 1,000 Hearts, the man who rules Polythrim. The descendants, they were unplanned. The creature is careless. There are so many ways to preserve life down here, and it wants to taste everything. It loses you. You still look human, for now. You find work, a husband, a kind man who asks no questions. He is unsurprised when you have a child, though you thought it impossible. You cannot tell him that your daughter is not fully human, that you are hardly human at all. Years later, collapse. The part of you that is lacquer is melting at last. There is but one thing that will revive you. You cannot ask for it, but your daughter knows. So she's a gnomon? But she needs the blood of her descendants to survive? Makes sense. The stars begin to twinkle out, and the crypt shimmers back into view. The Sage Archivist is helping the ardent bookkeeper to his feet. He's looking at her with an expression you have not seen before. She will not look him in the eye. "We should leave," he says. "Mr. Apples will be here soon, and we need to take her somewhere else." "Apples," says the astronomer. "The creature?" "Yes," says the archivist. "And it wants you. It wants to take you apart, find out how it made you, try to do it again." She looks at you, and a swirl of astral dust frames her face like a halo. "Are you ready?" she asks. Let me just talk to the ardent bookkeeper." The memories have troubled him. "You aren't human," says the ardent bookkeeper quietly. "Not entirely," replies the Sage Archivist, avoiding his gaze. "It's why I couldn't stay with you. That and the fact that your children's blood would be forever required by a shriveled old woman," says the lacquerous astronomer gently. "She didn't want that for them." "So you'd rather let her die?" says the bookkeeper. He puts his hands on the archivist's shoulders. "Then why are we here?" The archivist turns her face to his. "I have to have children," she said, "to keep her alive. I just wasn't expecting to fall in love." A tear spills down her cheek. "I can't do it with you." "Well, I guess we shall leave. It's time to leave. You've seen enough." The lacquerous astronomer tries to get to her feet, but her limbs bend beneath her. "She's still not ready," says the Sage Archivist. "We'll have to carry her." As the ardent bookkeeper folds his jacket into a makeshift sling, there is a hiss from behind you. Mr. Apples stands panting in the stone doorway, its robe torn and dusty. One of its feet hovers an inch above the ground, dark liquid dripping from its fur. From beneath the folds of its hood, two unblinking eyes stare at the lacquerous astronomer. "Give it to me," it says, "and I shall forgive any indiscretions." Mr. Apples lurches across the long room towards the lacquerous astronomer. It is wounded, and its progress slow, but it blocks your only exit. The Sage Archivist stands protectively in front of the astronomer, the ardent bookkeeper at her side. So we have a few options here. We can throw ourselves at Mr. Apples. This will harm you, but will give the other three a chance to escape. We can destroy the astronomer. She will finally be allowed to rest. The archivist will be free, and Mr. Apples will not benefit. We could try to convince the archivist to let Mr. Apples take the astronomer. Should you succeed, Mr. Apples will not look unkindly upon the four of you. We can ask the astronomer what she wants. It is her life at stake. In the time it takes to ask this, the creature will advance. Or we can ask Mr. Apples what it would do with the astronomer. Or we can look to the couple. Where will they go from here? Let's ask the astronomer what she wants. Perhaps I should go with the creature, says the lacquerous astronomer. I know things. I could be useful. You're tired, says the archivist. It's been too long since I visited you. I'm sorry. We'll get you out of here and... She casts a nervous look at the advancing Mr. Apples. I'll take care of you. I am tired, says the astronomer. Tired of dreaming, tired of taking from my children and my children's children. You've seen 4 cities drowned by lacquer, says the archivist. You could save the 5th if you had just a little more time. All things must come to an end, says the astronomer. If anyone knows that, it is I. Let's ask Mr. Apples what he'd do with the astronomer. I told you, says Mr. Apples, hauling itself across the floor towards the lacquerous astronomer. I wish to learn how to preserve ideas. There are only truly alive in the mind, where they can be part meat. It trembles. Some of those ideas must not be shared. London cannot be allowed to predict the lacquer floods. There are forces more powerful than I which will not countenance it. But there are other things. It stops to catch its breath. Perspectives, flavors, the movements of the real stars, the wisdom of millennia. All these could be bequeathed to the city. Okay, finally let's ask the couple. Where will they go from here? Because I feel like I should let him take the astronomer. That's the decision I'm making here. Let's look to the couple. This will be fine. What could possibly go wrong? Or I could convince the archivist to try and let the... Oh, God. We're gonna try this. We'll see what happens. 15%. Time to cross those fingers. Should have seen that coming. An unbroken line of my ancestors reaching all the way back to the first city have sacrificed everything to keep her alive, says the archivist, her fists clenched. To give her up now would be an insult to her memory. Welp. Mr. Apples is but a few feet from the lacquerous astronomer. It tenses and suddenly the back of its robe rips open. Something unfurls like a crack, like a snail caught in a surface sea wind, knocking you, the Sage Archivist, and the ardent bookkeeper to the ground. To watch as Mr. Apples takes the astronomer. It is all you can do now. You raise your head from the stone floor to see Mr. Apples descend on the lacquerous astronomer and gather her still malleable body up into its torn cloak. The Sage Archivist staggers to her feet and runs towards the creature. It bristles, ready to defend its prize, but the astronomer holds up a pale hand. Stop, dearest, he says. You have done enough. Trembling, the archivist watches as Mr. Apples shrugs the remains of its cloak around it and hobbles towards the door. The ardent bookkeeper puts his arm around the archivist. Come on, he says gently, and the 3 of you return to London in silence. And here's the epilogue. It has been some time since Mr. Apples claimed the lacquerous astronomer. Perhaps you should find out how your actions have affected the creature, if only to satisfy your curiosity. What of Mr. Apples' research? It had been searching for the astronomer for a millennia. You travel to the warehouse at Wolfstag Docks to find Mr. Apples contemplating jars of stewed fruit. When it sees you, it reaches a claw across your shoulders to draw you close. Something membranous stretches over your back. I cannot tell if your assistance was deliberate, it says, but you have my thanks all the same. I am making something, it continues, that can not only preserve knowledge, but metabolize it. A thinking machine of flesh and lacquer. I will share much of what I have learned with London, but there are some things I shall keep for myself. It runs a claw over your cheek. And you. It turns on its heel and swishes away between the barrels, like the ghost of a limp betraying its recent adventure. It has been some time since Mr. Apples claimed the Lacquerous Astronomer. Since your original assignment was to uncover the threat faced by the Sage Archivist, it would be fitting to conclude this venture with a visit to the university. Let's pay a visit to the university. Deliberately or not, you allowed Mr. Apples to take the astronomer from the Sage Archivist. How is she? You arrive at the Fur City Archive to find the ardent bookkeeper behind the Sage Archivist's desk. "It's just me, I'm afraid," he says. "Have some tea. I was just trying to organise this desk." As you drink, he explains, "She got me a job here at the university. I handle the accounts for the botany department. The money isn't as good as apples, but some things are more important." He gives you an apologetic look. "I'm afraid she'd rather not talk to you at the moment. Perhaps good things will come of what happened, but someone she loved was taken from her." He finishes his tea. "She'll be back soon, and you shouldn't be here when she arrives, but I'm glad to have seen you, all the same." I think that was actually the better ending there. I'm standing by that decision. Now those two get to be together. She's not bound by some lacquerous contract, and Mr. Apples may in fact create some technology that is interesting, and I like interesting. But that does appear to be the end of this exceptional story, so thank you very much for watching. Please like and subscribe. Let me know what you think. Your comments are greatly appreciated. And as always, I'll see you next time.